Greetings. My name is Associate Professor Phumla Sinxadi. I am the Chair and Head of Division of Clinical Pharmacology at the University of Cape Town in the Department of Medicine. I want to hand you over to the first author of the paper we're going to be discussing today. Enkosi.
Hello, everyone. You're speaking with Dr. Enkosi Mondleki from the Department of Pharmacology at the University of Free State. I'm a teaching and learning manager in the Division of Pharmacology here. Nice to having this discussion with you, Professor Sinxadi. So we are going to be discussing our paper, which titles as The Effect of Obesity on Dolutegravir Exposure in Black Southern African Adults Living with HIV. You can go to the next slide, Professor Sinxadi. So obesity itself is associated with poor health outcomes. According to the survey in 2016, it has been shown that South Africa has a high levels of pre-existing obesity, with accounted about 68% of women and 31% of men. And dolutegravir and other integrase strand inhibitors are associated with more weight gain in people starting antiretroviral therapy. And this, if you look at figure 3, which is the results from the 96 weeks of the advanced study, more women had obesity as compared to men. And we know that obesity is associated with various physiological changes that can affect drug pharmacokinetics. And these changes include changes in plasma protein, drug metabolizing enzymes and transporters, and also etc. So we felt it was important for us to look at the exposure of dolutegravir in these obese patients, as we know that obese patients are usually not excluded in the drug development studies. We can go to the next slide, Professor Sinxadi. So we enrolled 40 participants from the advanced study, which was the parent study. So this was a sub-study for the patients who signed consent to participate in this intensive PK study. So what we have done, we had participants with obesity. We had 10 participants with obesity, and also we randomized those other participants without obesity, and we've got about 30 of those. And then all those patients, we undergone an intensive PK study. So now I will hand over to Professor Sinxadi to talk about the results, or just to make an addition.
So, like we showed in the first graph, that a lot of people, especially women in the advanced study, actually gained a lot of weight, and you could see that the weight gain was continuing. Even at 96 weeks, it looked like it was still continuing. And the importance of doing this study was to check if is this going to affect the exposure. And when you're comparing people who've gained weight compared to the people who actually don't have weight gain, and to take out the treatment effect, we actually looked at obesity at baseline and when we were doing the intensive PK study, and these people would have been on treatment for at least 48 weeks. They had completed the 96-week follow-up when they were enrolled in the in the intensive PK study. And as you can see, we actually tried to look at people who were either on the TAF and the TDF group, but because this was a post hoc analysis looking at the patients with or without obesity, we ended up with 10 patients who were obese and then 30 patients who were without obesity. And the patients without obesity included the patients who were also overweight. And the gist of the results of this study is that when you look at the exposure of dolutegravir, what you're looking at right now is the concentration of dolutegravir on the y-axis over time, which is a 24-hour period. When we mentioned that we did the intensive PK sampling, we were talking about taking a serial of measurements. So patients were starved overnight, and they were told to record the time of taking their medication at night, and they come to us in the morning with ourselves. So they were told not to take their medication in the morning of coming for the PK sampling, because dolutegravir is taken once a day. We assumed that a lot of people would have taken it in the morning before they came for the sampling. So what we were taking at pre-dose would have been looking for my laser pointer. What they were taking at pre-dose would be a trough concentration before the observed dose, before the serial measurements, and we did the concentration, or took a sample before they were given the observed dolutegravir dose. We repeated at 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, and then they were sent home to come back the next day to take the 24-hour sample. And what we're comparing here, if you look at the participants in red, we were the 10 participants who had obesity compared to the participants without obesity, who are denoted in red, in black dots. And you can see that the participants who are obese had slightly lower exposure of dolutegravir compared to the participants without obesity. But what's important to note here is that even though the participants with obesity had lower concentrations, if you look at the exposure they get, it was still way above or much higher than the minimum concentration that is expected to do virological suppression. So the black line denotes the minimum effective dolutegravir concentration of 300 nanograms per milliliter. So even though the obese have lower concentrations, they still have adequate exposure of dolutegravir to continue with the virological suppression. So that's the key message for our study. So, Enkosi, over to you.
Okay, so we had we observed some limitations on our study. The first one was the sample size. We had a small sample size, and also this was a post-hoc analysis. And also we found that on our participants, when we looked at the participants with versus without obesity, we'll find that those without obesity included 17 participants who were overweight. But then we also did an sensitivity analysis comparing those 10 participants with the 17 participants which were healthy, and we found that the results were similar with what we've seen when we've compared those with and without obesity. And also the last limitation that we can make a comment about, our study only involved Africans that were included on our study, so therefore there might be a limited generalizability there.
Again, I'm not sure if that's a true limitation, because most of the time African patients are not included in these PK studies, and so our contribution is valuable. But Enkosi, before we conclude, what do you think about the idea that dolutegravir itself causes weight gain? And
there have been some thought about that. The dolutegravir itself, it causes weight gain. In fact, those integrase strand inhibitors, but it has been shown that in advanced sub-analysis, when they've looked now at the effervescence, especially with the slow metabolizers of effervescence, it has shown that those ones are the ones that were associated actually with weight loss. So it might be happening that the dolutegravir itself doesn't cause the weight gain, but it might be one of the hypotheses might be go back to normality, and so it might not be the dolutegravir that is causing the weight gain.
Yeah. So if you look at, I think I want to go back, the original slide, you can see that even some of the people on efavirenz actually do gain weight when they start antiretroviral. So this is actually a common thing for most people starting antiretroviral, the return to health phenomenon. But there is a concern about the increasing weight in the dolutegravir, but we still haven't found the biological plausibility why it would cause the weight gain in itself. The hypothesis was one of the hypotheses that has been discussed is that because it inhibits human MCR4 or melanocortin 4 receptor, it actually has been shown that to do that you need concentrations much higher than what is used clinically. So that still doesn't hold water in terms of dolutegravir as a drug causing the weight gain. And like we said, that could be that when you're comparing it to the efavirenz people, then it's the efavirenz patient or participants on efavirenz failing to gain weight rather than dolutegravir itself causing the weight gain. So what are our take-home messages from this study?
Okay, based on the graph that you have shown, when we've compared the participants with and without obesity, we saw that the dolutegravir exposure was marginally lower in participants with obesity, but this was not clinically significant. As you have seen that we didn't reach that minimum perpetuated concentrations for the dolutegravir. So there is no need for dose adjustment at the current moment.
But what about implications for research?
So for sure, for the research, it warrants more study, probably with a larger sample size, to look at the same questions. So I will encourage that if ever the people will need to carry on and looking now and enrolling more participants, especially the participants with obesity versus non-obesity, so that we can have a thorough conclusion based on the large sample size on the numbers.
Yeah. So I mean the study sample size of 10 obese participants was clearly limited in power for detecting the small difference that we saw between the patients with obesity, or participants rather, because these were volunteers. So participants with obesity versus participants without obesity. And so I think that the important message is that people shouldn't be unnecessarily switching participants who are gaining weight on dolutegravir, and they should rather be I suppose strengthening other ways of limiting weight loss. I mean weight gain, limiting weight gain. So encouraging lifestyle measures, which I must admit myself is difficult to maintain, and perhaps even consider pharmaceutical management of weight gain. So
definitely, because you're going to lose dolutegravir.
Yes, no, importantly, it's safe to use at the standard dose. So for patients who are obese.
No, definitely. I agree with you. Thank you, Professor Sinxadi. That was very informative.
All right. We'll be happy. I mean, I'm a corresponding author on this manuscript, and I think we forgot to mention that actually this is a collaborative study between BCT pharmacology and the group at Ezinja, who actually did most of the work. So in retrospect, I would like to acknowledge them, and it's been a fruitful collaboration that we're happy to continue.